All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's 4:30 or maybe a minute past, so we're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. You're ready, Jen?
Mayor Holland.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Taylor.
Here.
Commissioner Brownlow.
Here.
Commissioner Sanderson.
Here.
Commissioner Sawyer.
Here.
Commissioner Wooten.
Here. Thank you. Please bow your head with me in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for our continued blessings. Please be with us today, tomorrow, and always. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen. Please stand and face our flag for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, item number 5 would be the adoption of the agenda. Is there a motion to adopt?
So moved.
Commissioner Sanderson with the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion is carried. Before I call up Mr. Johnny Martin with Moffitt and Nickel to lead the discussion, I will preface by saying, first of all, thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. Going to call a hard stop to the meeting at 5:30. If we don't wrap things up before that, we've got our Board of Commissioners meeting at 6. Take us that long to get everybody transitioning in and out, but I want to give us a full hour to hopefully come to a resolution today. So at this time, I'll call up Johnny Martin with Moffitt and Nickel to lead our discussion, and we'll go from there.
All right. Thank you. And, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. All right. So, anyway, thanks for the opportunity to come and talk to you today about some of the work that we've been doing with.
It's not my favorite thing. There we go.
So Matt just asked that I would give a little history of, I guess, where we are, what we've been working on. I went back through my files last night, and I guess the first email I had about this project was in 2014. So we have been talking about it a good while. But just a little bit about, I think, just for people to understand a little bit about some of the constraints that we're working with and how the Cape Emerald Pond sort of ties into also sort of the Emerald Isle Wood site, because they are connected. So the first, sort of, this is the Emerald Isle Wood site here that you can see. And there was a discussion very early on in the design of this system to put a berm to sort of separate the two facilities. But in order to get the permits for the Emerald Isle Wood site originally, the Corps of Engineers had a lot of concerns about putting in a berm or a dike over wetlands and how that was going to change the natural flow paths and the hydro period, or how much water would stand. The geotechnical testing that we did showed that it would have limited effectiveness because the sands underneath are so transmissive, so that you would really have to put in a sheet pile wall that would probably have to go about 40 to 50 foot deep in order to really disconnect those two. And the other thing too is that while the Emerald Isle Wood site had a number of pumps coming to that, we also have the Ocean Oaks system across the street that then ultimately tied into this and sends the water to Cape Emerald Pond. And the expected pump discharges from the, pumps that we have throughout the Coast Guard Road area are actually considerably less than that flow coming through the culvert. So then there was this concern too of, if we were to disconnect those, some of the water that is coming from Ocean Oaks that would naturally go toward Emerald Isle Woods, if we cut that off, then it would even put more water into Cape Emerald and maybe cause even more flooding that historically had been there. So for all of those reasons is why ultimately it was decided not to put that separation in. Of course, there was an outlet structure too that was put in that allows water to go to the sound. That was put in 2011. We've been putting in pumps over time because the town has, just wanted to do this, as you go. And so, roughly we think, or roughly we know that between the 7 pumps currently pumping there and the Osprey Ridge pump now that pumps into the site, depending on the water elevations on both sides, there's roughly 10 to 15 CFS coming into the Emerald Isle Woods site from the pump stations. And if you just look at the culvert the culvert system or the drainage system coming in from Ocean Oaks, just if you assume a full flow for those 36-inch pipes at the very end of the site, it's roughly 30 to 40 CFS. So you can see that we're talking roughly total water coming into this combined area with Cape Emerald and Emerald Isle Woods, 2/3 coming from Ocean Oaks, 1/3 coming from what's pumped. So that was another reason why we did not want to take away that potential relief valve from Emerald Isle Woods away from that water coming from Ocean Oaks ultimately into Cape Emerald. So just trying to give some background on those decisions. This is just a graphic showing the current pump systems and how they feed into Emerald Isle Woods. I won't stay there for long, but this plot is kind of hard to see, but kind of shows the culverts coming from Ocean Oaks into Cape Emerald and ultimately around the tennis court and into the pond. So we began some discussions back in 2016, 2017, which, forgive me, shellfish sanitation. I try not to say that really fast because you can get your tongue messed up pretty quickly if you try to say shellfish sanitation too quickly. But, they're the ones who decide when to open and close the sound, right? And so there's concerns, and right now I think the sound is closed if there's roughly 3 inches of rainfall in a 24-hour period. If you tried to get what's there at Cape Emerald permitted today, you would not be able to do so, and unless Roy would probably be able to tell me, but no new ocean discharges is kind of a hard, fast rule. So there was a lot of negotiations. Again, we wanted to make, the current pipe is a 15-inch pipe. The reason we wanted to make it a little bit bigger was because for some reason a lot of turtles seem to love to get up into the end of this pipe and clog it. And, of course, that was always never discovered until you had a big hurricane event and you're trying to find out why is it not releasing water. So long story short, I won't make you go through all the emails we had with shellfish sanitation, but the most what they really wanted to make sure that we did was that the flow coming out of the pond up until there's a release also through that outlet in Emerald Isle Woods, they wanted to make sure that that flow rate was just about the same as what it was with the 15-inch pipe. So again, we haven't gotten the CAMA permit for it, but we had finally gotten toward the end of some of our discussions a couple of years ago with shellfish sanitation that we showed, okay, we can put an 18-inch line in, we can put a pretty complex inlet structure attached to that to control the water to where the flow rates are about the same. And so that's ultimately what we came up with, and ultimately what we did go out and get at least some bids for, but we had never gotten the final permits because there was all this discussion about the easement that I'm sure Matt's going to talk about. So anyway, I just already kind of talked through this. I won't bore you with some of the graphs over to the right. But so essentially, the plan is you have this existing pipe here through this property that the plan was to come in and sort of, cap that off on both sides, fill it with flowable fill, and then construct this new, now 18-inch pipe along this sort of right-of-way here. Oops. So the last the last slide was really about backflow preventers. So again, you're always worried too about the tide coming up at the very, backwater coming in to those. So there was a discussion of, should we look at putting in sort of a backflow preventer, these duct bills or sort of these inline systems? The jury's still kind of out on that a little bit. Some of the coastal communities that we work for in other areas, such as the city of Norfolk, and some discussions we had with Tybee Island gave concern, especially with some of the duct bills that you see up at the top, that it does reduce the flow capacity from the upstream side, because it takes a little bit of cracking pressure to open that up to get flow coming in. So I think the thought process was, let's get the system put in place, and then the town could maybe put in one of these inline ones that you see at the bottom, and maybe do some testing and see how it works, and something that could be easily removed if needed. So, Matt, I don't know if you want to open up for questions, or if you want to talk through the easement.
So, Mayor, if you want, I think the simplest is to give a quick 1 or 2 minute refresh of where we stand. So the town board, this is the seated town board, we're trying to make sure that they're up to speed with a new Cape Emerald board, and we've worked through, I think, 3 or 4 versions of the Cape Emerald board in my tenure so far. The last direct communication came from Mayor Holland on January 9th of 2023. If you don't have a copy of it or haven't seen it, there's letters, should be color versions of it at the table. But the bottom line, the impasse that we have reached, the town had secured funding and held funding aside for greater than 24, I think almost 36 months. And if you could go back up to the slide, Mark, that shows the home with the yellow hashes and how the pipe has a direct dogleg right in it. If you look at the historical evidence, we suspect that when the lot, which is now labeled as 416 Cape Emerald Loop, was developed, it would make sense that to put the house there, that someone adjusted the pipe's exit. So traditionally, if you're looking at the, with the image that's up on the screen, if you're building a pipe, you normally wouldn't put turns in it, especially if it's drainage, it's straight. So historical reference would tell us that when they went to develop and put the house in, that they moved the pipe over. So we would need, the town had identified to our representatives from Cape Emerald that we would need permission from 416 to decommission said pipe, like Johnny indicated. The best management practice for decommissioning that pipe would be to block it at both ends and then fill it with flowable fill, which is a concrete slurry wall hardened in place. Because in 2018-19, we'd had some failures here where the pipe joints were separating and the yard collapsed. And so the town was called in because we have a mutual agreement with the HOA. The town ended up going in and doing repairs on private property at 416 and then landscaping. And Joe may reference, I think it was, we expended around that $10,000 to $12,000 range making repairs and landscaping for the property owner at 416. So we all can agree that turns in the pipe are not good and that a straight solution would behoove everyone involved, from the town's maintenance perspective to the residents of Cape Emerald to even the property owner at 416. So the property owner at 416 and the property owner who is directly to the right of the new hashed yellow straight line would be part and parcel to the solution, from signing off on an indemnification waiver at 416 and a temporary construction easement at the property due right. So the property east of the new proposed line would need to participate because we couldn't physically get in there and do the construction work without a temporary easement. And so those proposals have been given to the past property owners of both homes, and we haven't been able to get signatures. So in end of 2022, I believe during the month of November or December, which we tried to have a conversation almost 2 years ago with the seated board from Cape Emerald, we said, if you can help us get these signatures, then we can theoretically move forward and get the permit from CAMA and then go out to bid. The estimates started in the $50,000-$60,000 range, and then estimates over time, post-COVID, have put that number somewhere around that $100,000 to $150,000 range, depending on how we build the head structure and how we put the pipe in. And then there was conversations of how far the town would make repairs on that public beach access walkway, and then probably Cape Emerald would make a decision if we fixed boards on 50 or 60% of it, would you want to do the rest of it? So there was all this work that needs to be done, but the round numbers for the sake of this conversation, step one would be securing permission from the two property owners. Step two would be determining and going get the permit. Step three would then be going out for bid. And then now step four for us, we have since moved those funds out of holding, and I think we've allocated those funds for the replacement of the gym floor and other immediate needs within the community. So we are at a position where the town hasn't earmarked this 100 or 150,000. Does that, I'm going to look at Laura and Joe, does that bring us basically up to speed? That's the perspective of the town side, and I know today would probably be a very good opportunity to hear from either the HOA board themselves and or residents, answer any questions that people have about how and why and where we are.
Thank you. All right, well, at this time, we will open it up to questions for either Mr. Martin or Mr. Zapp or anybody up here, but these two gentlemen are in tune, so with a hand up and nobody's jumping at the bit, but yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name's Chip Thomas. I'm the president of our HOA.
Excuse me.
And first of all, I would like to thank you guys for setting this up.
Yeah, if you talk into the mic, Chip, they won't hear you at home.
You just have to talk into it.
It should be on.
Okay, sorry. But anyway, thanks for having us. We really appreciate your willingness to work with us on this project. Obviously, over the last month, we've seen examples of flooding, and it's really kind of weird. We had 15 inches of rain, and it flooded, but it didn't breach the top of the pond. But I think it was 8 inches we had a couple weeks ago, that was all pretty quickly. That was even worse. So we're anxious to come up with some solutions and hear what you guys, have to say and how you want to help us with this. So I'm going to open it up to Tom Markovich, our vice president. He's got some questions and some points that he'd like to make.
Thank you.
Oh, Tommy's first.
Good evening. My name's Tom Sanger. I've lived in Cape Emerald a short time. I've lived in the island about 25 years. I've been a neighbor to some of you. My technical question, being a fireman for 30 years and knowing the flow of water, we've significantly added the flow of water into those ponds. I walk my dog on a daily basis through the park. I'd like to know the height of the pipe at Cape Emerald and the height of I call it the spillway in the park. And that spillway is gated. So I'm under the impression that we have to ask permission if a storm is coming to open those gates. I don't quite understand why, but I'm sure there's some technical reason for that. I can tell you by my observations that the water is flowing through Cape Emerald 100% until it gets to a certain point, and then it's slowly going out that spillway. It seems like we're taking the volume every day now that we've added all these pumps that come through the park, and to me, it just doesn't make sense at this point. My second observation is I don't understand why we are held hostage by an individual who doesn't want to give us permission to move the pipe when it affects so many people, not in just Cape Emerald, but in the plantation or Land's End and all those where we're pumping from.
Well, I'll start with the elevations. So if you could bring back up the PowerPoint. And there's one with a graphic here. I'll try to find it here. Okay. So essentially, the normal pond level is around elevation 2. So these are all to NAVD or mean sea level. So, when you're walking out there and there's not flood waters coming in, it's a nice quiet day, sort of, the top of the box before water kind of spills in. That's roughly elevation 2. So the 2 elevations I'm showing here is you're asking about the elevation of now the pipe itself is, of course, there's a box, water goes in, that pipe goes out, and I think it's around elevation negative half a foot, something like that. So what happens is, of course, is that water's kind of held at that elevation of 2, and then the elevation of the discharge within the Emerald Isle Woods, the big gate structure that you're talking about, is 4.2. So there's a little over 2 feet to that elevation, 2 foot of rise between the normal pond elevation to when it can get out through that weir. Now, when we got the permits for putting in that system at Emerald Isle Woods and putting in this discharge point, excuse me. So again, a rule, and, Commissioner Brownlow might be able to help me here, is I can't remember when it kind of came out that there's no new discharges or point source discharges that can be flowing all the time. So what that meant was we could have this discharge, but we could then only release it when the sound is closed to shellfishing, because they're worried about the water quality of this pumped water going in on a day-to-day basis. So that was sort of a negotiation that happened during permitting of the entire system. As far as what you're saying is, and I'm sure that there are days when there's maybe not flow coming in from Ocean Oaks through that system, and maybe there's more water coming in from the pump side. I'm sure there is occasion when there's water that's coming in from that. But again, when we're designing these systems, we're looking at it when there's flood waters from the entire system. So again, we could have pushed further if we wanted to put that barrier in between, but the Corps of Engineers said we don't want wetland impacts. And the other thing that we thought was potentially, again, a benefit to Cape Emerald during storm events. Now, during storm events is when that system from Ocean Oaks is coming at you full bore, then you want some connectivity between the two of them. So again, it's a balance, right? So, I mean, there is sort of this give and take that was done in the design and permitting of the system. So as far as the held hostage part, I'll leave that for you, Matt, to answer.
So if Mr. Singer, if I caught it correctly, first question was elevation of pipes.
Correct.
Second question was discharge protocol. Third question is, why are we held hostage by 416 Cape Emerald?
Correct.
Okay. Second question for the discharge protocol. So every municipality is required to, specifically on Bogue Banks, communicate to the state of North Carolina. We have now 3 specific state representatives that we have to notify and ask permission to pump before we can do any direct discharge to either the Sound or the Atlantic Ocean side. And at this particular case, we used to have a 6-inch threshold, and we were able to negotiate that down to a 3-inch rainfall event in 24 hours. So even if we anticipate, and this is a horrible example, since it's fresh probably for everyone, you do see that a major category, either 4 or 5 storm, is fixing to hit Tampa Bay in the next 24 to 48 hours. If we were all sitting here facing that hurricane disaster, we don't have the right to pre-pump down the ponds. The state holds the authority for water quality purposes to tell us when and when we cannot pump into the Sound. So for us, we have to wait till we have 3 inches of rain, then it's determined that it's a potential threat to life and property, and then we're allowed to open the weirs or the valve systems in Emerald Isle Woods. And I'm gonna turn to Joe, make sure I didn't misspeak on anything, because it's always better to have our team. Is that all 100% accurate? So what we do is we are communicating during events, we monitor and we track rainfall at multiple sites across the island, because you can see major swings just on the island in our jurisdictional responsibility on actual inches that have fallen. So as soon as we get to a trigger point, we notify the state immediately. And so then we begin to start to either release extra water or pump. Does that make sense for you and anyone else? 3 inches is the trigger. Absolutely, if you have a follow-up, for sure.
So at 3 inches is when you decide to open this, I call it the spillway, or bring us a pump and pump 5-inch hose out. You need permission to do that too from the state?
So I think the way you framed it, and I want to be really specific, and I'm not being,
That's fine.
as soon as we get the green light at 3 inches, we open. So to answer your question, that is correct. As soon as we get to 3 inches, we can start letting water out there, and that's what we do. And sometimes that's in the middle of the night, and we are on standby for that. And the most recent storm that we can use is PTC, or potential tropical cyclone number 8, and that brought 2 inches of rain over the Sunday portion and 7 inches of direct rain on Monday. And as soon as we got permission, we opened those opportunities to start flowing out. That is first step. The second step, and this is not going to land well, I want to preface my statement that there's a difference between perception and what's actually happening. In your neighborhood, there's a perception that the second we bring a pump in, you have a greater sense of protection. And what we're bringing in is a 6-inch pump, and that 6-inch pump at idle can move approximately 500 gallons of water per minute. To make an analogy, the 6-inch pump is really a feel-good pump because the 15-inch pipe is moving such a gross amount of water, and the valves are working in EI wood. So it's not that we don't want to do that. There's a huge cost associated with it, and we've gladly done it. But even during PTC number 8, and if it's okay if I reference you, we have a resident that called, and she was really concerned. She said, she called Commissioner Taylor, he called me, why aren't we doing this? And I said, we're actually in the process of doing that, and we should have a pump to you all soon. Well, the actual issue wasn't at Cape Emerald. You hadn't breached the edges of the banks, you hadn't overflowed the roadways, and we were discharging that pipe at Island Circle Coast Guard, and we moved a little bit north of 5 million gallons of water in 7 days there. And so there's this, we really would like to have a good open conversation with your residents about expectations in delivery. So to answer your question, at 3 inches, we can start flowing out of EI woods. And if we do bring a 6-inch pump in, it's helpful, it's not negative, but it's not moving much volume comparative to what you would need.
Okay, it was my observation, as I said, I walk in there every day, that the spillway was barely flowing when the lady called, and we were almost over the banks. It was at the cul-de-sac, it was just starting to come into the street. And that's where I guess we need to talk to someone in the state. You can shake your head, but.
We want to tell you that we have these conversations on a daily basis. They're looking at the totality of water quality, and I'm not sure that there's much we can do to move that needle. In those negotiations of bringing down the threshold was really a lot of that was a win for us. If you had to wait till 6 inches, that's when you were having greater problems in the past. Now I'll pause there, and I think I know this answer. But from 2018 at Hurricane Florence, and when did you move into the neighborhood?
2.5 years, 2 years ago.
Okay. I'll start with you, and this
I was
is.
in Archer's Creek for Florence, so.
I'll start, and this is not a caught you situation, it's a try to get better understanding. You haven't taken any water at your personal property in the period that you've lived there, have you?
No.
Has anyone taken water at a personal residency since Florence? To anyone's knowledge?
Underneath their houses, or were you asking?
Into the livable space of their structure. We don't know that. We don't think that that's the case.
The last 2 tropical storms, it was right up to people's garage doors.
Right, but nothing breached the actual structures. And that's important for us because if we track all that data. If you have what's considered a FEMA responsible event where you have to file a claim to file event, that triggers other things. So what the evidence is showing is that the improvements that we're making, the clarity that we're trying to do, and then I'll pause all of this to tell you, and I want to jump ahead and then come back. We have worked very closely with Land's End. Land's End has a little bit of, right at 300, a little bit north of 300 parcels. They're moving on average per year between 250 million and 272 million gallons of water that is being pumped up into the EI Woods. We have a project that is fully funded, that is now designed, and a CAMA permit has been issued to do what's called a dune infiltration system. That dune infiltration system will actually move that 250 million plus gallons of water away from EI Woods, which is the biggest win we can give you all, and it will discharge that water to the dune side of the system, which will operate like a very large septic tank, and they're broken down into cells. That project is fully designed, now permitted, and in its funding stage, and we have confirmation from the federal government that we're allocated up to $850,000. So we're getting ready to bid that project and hopefully construct that project in 2025. We think that's a very powerful piece of information too. So we're very thankful and would hate to have anybody even have water at that garage door, but we're thankful over this last 60-month period, plus or minus, that no one's taken water in their structure.
Okay, can I ask one more question?
You can ask.
Before we get to the neighbor that won't, I guess won't give us permission?
Sure.
Who maintains, do we look inside this pipe and the pipe that goes from the tennis court pond to the discharge pond? Do we look at the maintenance of what's silt is in there?
Yes, sir.
We do?
Gladly answer that. I arose here on June 12th, 2019. During that tenure, Joe was our Assistant Public Works Director. He's now elevated to Director. We have mapped that system, digitized the system, we have cleaned that system, and we have an annual process that we do. We work with the neighboring community in Newport. It was approximately $63,000 to $65,000 cost to come in and clean the entirety of the enclosed pipes. And utilizing Newport's forced account labor and their truck, we can do it for under $12,000, and we coordinate with them. In addition, this board has been tremendous. We applied for a grant. We received money to get a pull-behind trailer-style vac haul trailer, and we use that system, and we check each of our manhole inlets on a monthly basis, if not more frequent. So they have a system that they cycle 12 times a year. They're checking everything, and then we have what's called a pre-emergent or pre-emergency protocol, where we know that, uh-oh, it's coming, so we go out and check everything again. So we have implemented a digitized stormwater system that's currently available and online. We have a system of checks and balances for cleaning it. We have invested in additional equipment, and we have what we consider to be a mutual aid agreement and work with our good neighbors and partners in Newport.
Can you tell me the last time those pipes were clean? I mean, do we have a date? I don't,
We do.
these,
The pipes were cleaned out 2 years ago.
okay. What about the silt that's built up from the park to the, has anybody looked at that recently? The silt from the park into Cape Emerald.
You're talking about the wetlands in Silverstone? Dredging our pond.
The silt, because the water level is probably 2 inches.
I can address that. So previous 1 or 2 cycles ago, with the board, we had conversation about dredging those ponds. We talked about your private streets, and we talked about the willingness to come in and dredge those. We had a company come in and quote it. They were going to utilize what is considered to be a rubber-tired, long-reach hand unit that comes across the banks of your ponds, pulls the dredging material up. We have a tremendous amount of correspondence on that, which would have required roadway protection. We had matting and systems and options, and we said, we'll gladly do that. That's above and beyond. We'd gladly do that. We would need the subdivision to tell us that they're not going to hold us responsible for damaging something while repairing something that you've asked for.
Gotcha.
We couldn't quite get you all to do that, and they said, well, the benefit doesn't outweigh the potential threat, so the ponds are good, leave them alone. And we also talked about coming back and doing beautification. We looked at your walls on both sides. So we have had these conversations and
Okay.
tracked them down with your leadership team.
All right.
And if you all decide that dredging or cleaning that is something you want to revisit, we'll gladly engage that.
Okay. Terrific.
Because the more, you're right, the more capacity you have, the better off we are. We couldn't concur with you more.
All right. Terrific.
Yeah.
You can address that last question. It'd be great.
A little bit. So we have our attorney with us today, but I'll say to you this, that our previous attorney, the attorney that followed that attorney that had been here 42 years, and our most recent set of attorneys prior to this team have all determined that just as we couldn't go on your property without your permission, we can't go on 416 Cape Emerald. We know that your HOA documentation gives you all some authority to do that, but that authority isn't transferable to the city if we were going to do the project. So what we had asked for before was one of two things. You would take the lead because it was very politely problematic at best, to say the least. And multiple communications to both property owners. One was non-responsive at all to the east, and the one to the west was refusing to allow us to do anything. When in fact, I stood in front of him, shook his hand and said, if this was my home, I'm personally telling you, like in my heart of hearts, I would allow the town to do this. This is going to protect you, protect your investment, and it will help the entire community. And there was an impasse there. And so unfortunately, we're at a position where we couldn't move that ball any further. Now, if we also offered, I believe, that if your team wanted to bid the job, execute the job, the town board at the time was willing to refund you on a completion basis, very similar to what we have with FEMA, that if you all would manage that project, execute it, we would give you the funding to do it, because that would then give us a buffer of separation, which if you have authority, execute, and then we can help you fund it. That was a choice too, and I think, and I'm paraphrasing, one, we don't have, this was the HOA side, we don't have the funding to front load it, and two, that's not our area of expertise. And so we all are seeing the same problem, and I'm not laying blame at the feet of 416 Cape Emerald, but it would be helpful if there was an indemnification waiver from 416, and I'm sorry if I'm blanking, is it 414 on the, is it 18? It's either goes up or down by 2, but it's to the direct to the east. 14. So 14 and 16 need to play ball with us, and we want to help you. If anybody else in the room has a suggestion, we'd hear it, but that's phrasing it for Mr. Smith here, and I would let Kirby speak to if there's any other choices that I may have missed.
No, I think you about covered it. I mean, absent permission from the landowner,
So the pipe is, it's the town's, it's Cape Emerald?
That can speak to that if you want from historical reference. So if you bring up the Cape Emerald outfall imagery again, Mark, that has the yellow dashes. And if I'm not mistaken, the current owner of 416 purchased the home in 2018, or he had it prior to Florence. And I'm not being anything other than transparent. That pipe existed when the developer put in that phase of your development. Whether that was a permitted exit point or not, none of us can prove or disprove. I can only suspect that at the time that this was constructed, it was probably okay to do and didn't ask anybody. Well, then that lot was probably identified as a non-buildable lot, and somehow somebody got their hands on it and wanted to develop it. And so, well, if I just dogleg right and dogleg left my pipe, I can put a house here. And then it became much more valuable than a vacant lot. And that's all that we can muster from the details that we have. So the question is, whose pipe is it? It's technically Cape Emerald's pipe, but there's two different agreements in position where the town has water that flows through those pipes, and the town is actively and positively engaged with helping you maintain, not putting any more water through your system. But Cape Emerald is a partner of ours, and you are a key to the safety of that whole region. So the short answer, it's Cape Emerald's pipe. The short answer, it's on this person's property without an easement. So that is where it becomes muddied in the legality of who can go where, what, when, and how. Does that make sense at 10,000 feet?
What would prevent Cape Emerald from, on our property side?
If you don't mind, I hate to be the guy on the mic, but it helps anybody that might be, any of your residents that might be listening.
So what would prevent us, Cape Emerald, from taking that pipe on our side of the pond, as that picture, on the other side of the road, and just block it off in order to allow a pipe to go right down the middle of our boardwalk?
So if you will, do you mind if I use the pointer?
Yeah, sure.
I'll come up and help you a little bit.
Yeah, I'm talking about,
Yeah, I'll help lead that conversation. So Chip and I see the same thing, right? So the question is, I'm gonna point at the TV I'm in a bad spot here. Can you cap the pipe right here
or preferably right here.
or here? The reality is, from the safety of your street, we'd want to cap the pipe here. Because if we can't access property, you want to cap the pipe and fill it at least under the roadway, because you don't want to compromise the roadway, right?
But
So
it's compromised when there's no rain, it's empty, so,
Well-
it's kind of one half dozen or the other.
No, that's actually not a true statement. What I would say to you from an engineering perspective is, you want to fill that pipe, and you want to fill it from the pond as close to his property as you can for the safety of Cape Emerald going forward. If that makes logical sense, sir.
Okay.
So
okay with that.
there's a potential where even if we were in the roadway, right, had to do a minor cut in the roadway to cap your pipe, we could fill that whole section. So we've already discussed that with your leadership team. That exposes you to creating a potential threat to 416. And then if we help you do that, then by default, if there's a suit that's brought, the town would then ultimately be named in that suit, because what's going to happen is tidal water will backwash into that pipe. If there continues to be failure on 416 where the pipe is compromised, these are all problems that we shared with the Callahans, that it would be beneficial to them if we capped the pipe and filled it for them. Because what we were going to do, if you all have been there and you've gone out that beautiful walkway, the pipe discharges. So we would take a 90-degree riser, bring the riser up, and you would actually start to force fill, flowable fill on that side, the north side. We would have it capped where the current box is at the pond, and then you would fill the pipe till it's 100% full, you let it dry, then we come and saw off the riser, the temporary riser, and we even offered to fix the vinyl on the retaining wall in that immediate section to make it not only permanent improvement, but aesthetically appealing. And all of those things were turned down. We've all been there multiple times. We've had these conversations. So logically, I'm very stumped as to why you wouldn't accept that as a solution to protect you and your investment, but can't answer that.
So if you're saying it's his private pipe.
If you don't mind, can we use the mic so that, in case other residents in your neighborhood?
So if it's his pipe, and you're saying it's his pipe now, correct? Not Cape Emerald's, not the town's.
No, I would say, I'm not the attorney in this equation, but there's some ambiguity as to when you're on his private property, the pipe was installed by your developer. Whether there's a transference of ownership, there's nothing, there's no easement, no anything recorded. So there is a communal pipe across a private property. That we do know is fact. So then the question is.
So then the question is, if we just cap it on our property, how are we liable for his property? How's that gonna, I guess that's where we're perplexed. I got a bunch of other stuff too, so.
When you, there are actually statutes in the state that prohibit you from blocking drainage ditches. If you were to do that, you could be liable for the damage you cause.
But how's that a drainage ditch for his property?
Well, I mean,
It's not draining anything from his property.
Well, I'm just saying, yeah, if you block it, you could be liable for any consequences as a result of that.
Okay. All right, side notes, this is stuff that we have as a board that we just don't understand. Like, we have this pond agreement here that, I'm just gonna hit some highlights. It's gonna counter some stuff that was stated earlier. We've seen the press release recently when the news contacted you guys, and it was stated that these are Cape Emerald's pipes, they're private pipes, and the town's just maintaining them. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, sir, I would stand by that, they're Cape Emerald pipes and that we have an agreement to help you maintain
Okay.
them.
The pond agreement that was signed between Cape Emerald and the town July 13th, still binding right here. The town maintains a public drainage pipe that runs along the western side of Ocean Oaks, et cetera, et cetera. This public drainage pipe drains the stormwater runoff from Cape Emerald. And it goes on to basically say that it's the town's pipe, not ours. And the town signed this. And then continuing on, parties recognize the significant public benefit provided by public ownership and maintenance of the drainage pipe. It says where it goes, and then here's to the ponds, dredging the ponds. And I could give everybody this agreement if you want. The town shall also be responsible for repair of any private street damage related to the public drainage pipe, including the timely repair of sinkholes and potholes. And we go on in here to, within 10 foot wide, there's an easement in here for the pipe, which is, you're saying is now private. But when you said you wouldn't drain or dredge our ponds because we were responsible for the roads, well, right in here, it stated the town is.
I can help you. I've read that as well.
Right, okay.
What
so-
you've just verbalized can be interpreted by your
Correct.
attorney, our attorney, but
Okay.
it says the roads for sinkholes caused by the failure of the pipe. Maintaining your ponds, we indicated that there would be potential damage to the edges of your ponds and/or your roadways, which is not pertinent to that statement. What we're saying is if the pipe fails that crosses the road, the town would come in, fix the pipe, and fix the road. So then you've asked for the ponds to be dredged. What we went through this with a fine-tooth comb, and we want to help you. We will gladly do it, but with all due respect, I don't believe that you're interpreting that accurately.
Okay, because then it goes on to say about the ponds are supposed to be 2 foot deep and be dredged, and we got a couple inches. All right, well, anyways, so that's that question.
So can you pause there? You have substantially more than a couple of inches. If you deem that you would like those ponds dredged and your board asks us to do that, we'll gladly initiate. We offered to do that 24 and 36 months ago, and your board chose not to. But if you do want to have it done today, again, I'll stand by that we're here on go to help you.
Okay. And then I guess I'll go back to, that news article that was published from Cape Emerald said, this is a private system. But yet everything in this pond agreement, it's saying it's a public system, not private.
No, again, I would stand that your pipes in your pond, do you have a gate in your community, yes or no?
Yes.
Are your roads public or private?
Yeah, I know where you're going. They're private, but
But that's the chain of events. So you're in a private subdivision with a gate, and if we were to, and one of the conversations was to actually eliminate any flow through you. If there was no additional flow through you, we could divert the flow to EI Woods, then your system would be private, only serving your ponds and your flow. That would be a benefit to you, right? If you didn't take anybody else's water.
okay.
I think that would be a huge benefit to you. So that's a conversation that if we can divert flow and move that water elsewhere, I mean, the question on the floor would be, would you prefer to only deal with Cape Emerald water in your ponds and pipes? And I think the answer would be yes. We're transferring water through you.
Mm-hmm.
We, the city, didn't install any of that infrastructure, never took ownership of that infrastructure, and now have an agreement, I think is a 13 agreement, and then we did an update in what year? It was 22 or 3, we did another one.
Yeah.
So we identified all of that, but I mean, if the others would like to opine of whether or not it's private or public, the conversation here is we're still engaged with you. We still want to help you. If you want it dredged, we'll dredge it. If you want the pipe installed, we're helping to do that. I think that for the sake of your time here, everyone should see on the floor that the only thing holding us from helping you move forward is the agreements at 416 and 414.
All right, so-
We don't disagree with you on the identity that we would be there to help you.
Okay, so a couple more questions. So when I signed the stormwater pipe easement in 2020, with already done up here, that's still binding, correct? I gave you guys the easement under the walkway. And in that,
Yes, sir.
the same thing, it says you guys have the easement to go on both sides and move the pipe. And so would this take care of the property on the left? Is this is saying right here?
Yeah,
you
I
guys
know
own
the answer.
property now.
I understand the question you're asking, and I know the answer. What's the width of your communal access walkway?
Well, this is given 10 feet.
What's the width of your communal access walkway? If you go to the GIS and you pull up the width of your communal access
It's 10
walkway,
feet.
you've granted us easement on that 10 feet.
Correct.
You can't grant us easement on the private property, east and west. Those owners have to grant us easement. So on the east side, we asked for, I think, a 10 to 15-foot temporary construction easement and couldn't secure it because we'd have to move spoils over to, so if we're digging in the 10-foot, we couldn't pile and work our way out of the 10-foot. We said we need to be able to pile the spoils onto the east side, and any disruption that we made on the east side, we promised to replace, and I think the term was, to an equal or better state than found at the time and beginning of construction, to be documented by photographic and videographic evidence, because we want to protect them. The real reality is because I think they were both lawyers that lived there, so we were super CYA. We want to make sure that they got what they needed, but we have that easement, and that was great when we signed that together, but it's a virtual construction impossibility to pull up the walkway, install the pipe without impacting anybody on the east and west.
So does that do anything as far as dealing with the one on the left that won't sign?
No, sir, until, those are private properties, so you can't give us, unless the attorney tells me different. In all of my training, we have to have access rights from the people, even if we put temporarily step onto that land, we by law can't go on there, disturb it without agreement from 16 and 414.
Okay. So here's the agreement for the right side. So that one's done. All right. So I guess we see it differently about you could use that property on the right side and just seal the pipe and move on. And then the other big question we have.
I have to interrupt you because if you have a great piece of information, which is the smoking gun that the 14 is signed, 2 thumbs up, that's great.
But you're saying we still got to deal with the left, right?
Well, you were asking a different question I think I was trying to answer. So now that we have the agreement, thank you for helping us get that. We're going to have to now hand it to our attorney. We would have to file that agreement with Carteret County, which is fantastic, and we'll sign it, notarize it, and make that happen. Thank you. The other piece is you would still have to have some sort of authority to cap off 416. And if we cap it at the street, again, I think all 4 legal teams have verbalized that you're exposing us by connectivity to the project if we cap it at the street.
Okay. Can they revisit that? Can we ask you guys, or no? Okay. All right, and then here's our.
I'm not shaking my head. I'm going to ask the mayor, if you want us to have a 5th attorney revisit the exposure at 416, that's up to the, or 416, that's up to the board. I wouldn't do it professionally because each of those firms have told us that you need to have indemnification there, but that's your call.
I would, not to pass the buck, but I would defer straight to the board. They would authorize any expenditures. I have no issue with it. These men and women make the choice on spending the money, not spending the money. I'll ask the board right now, in the sake of time and the sake of effort of helping Cape Emerald, brief discussion on which direction we want to travel as far as getting another legal opinion on researching the accessibility.
I'll speak first. I'd spend the money in a second if I thought we'd come up with a different answer, but I just don't think that we will. So I think we'd be throwing money away. Be better spent on something else that gets a more productive result.
Agreed.
What's the capacity of that pipe, Johnny or Matt, we seem to be focused on this one pipe. I think there's a whole lot of other options we haven't even looked at. And new wetland rule regulations have changed too that might allow wetland alteration that we couldn't do before. So is there anything, is that pipe really the save all for the subdivision?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I got one more when you're done. All right.
So, yeah, I'd have to go back and look, Roy, and I can send you an email once I have a chance to check it tomorrow. But, through that pipe, right before we have water going out over the spillway, even that 15-inch pipe at full capacity is probably like 11 CFS. So, that's roughly 6,000 gallons per minute. So, it is pretty substantial, but, let me check that and email you back tomorrow once I've sitting in front of my computer as an engineer nerd looking at my stuff. But I will get that back to you, what that capacity is. But it's essentially each one of those pumps that we have going to Emerald Isle Woods is roughly, well, if you go back, you can see in that PowerPoint that roughly the capacity of that 15-inch pipe, again, with about 2 foot of head pressing on it, is about the same flow rate that you have pumping from those 7 pumps all over the island. So it is a pretty, I don't want to say substantial, but it's important. I mean, in the land of here at the coast where 6 inches means the world, 11 CFS is pretty important.
On that note, the comparison,
Sorry to cut you off. We are right about 5 minutes here, so we'll try to get it wrapped up here, please.
what's important to compare is if the pipe is at full flow at 6,000 and we put a 6-inch pipe in there and it's a maximum push of 500 gallons, the opportunity of what the pump's doing is not anywhere remotely close. So thank you so much for getting us this. And I think Kirby wants to point out that the easement goes into effect, which would provide us 120 days at start of construction, which this is just the temporary construction easement. The other real needed piece is at 416, if you can help us get that. Because ultimately, if we can get the 18-inch pipe in that remains open, and I think I shared this the last time Chip was at the meeting, Johnny was very discreet about his description of why the 2 turtles were in the pipe. They were mating in the pipe, and then they died there, and so we had to pull them out. So we know that we want to keep that pipe clean, and we're trying to inspect all of that. So at the end of the day, a straight discharge with a flared end on an 18-inch piece is going to be dramatically better for the entire subdivision.
Yes, sir. If you want one more, and we'll go ahead and wrap up. Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you guys short, but yeah, please go ahead.
Is there any legal ramification on our end or the town's end that we can take this man to court to get a temporary easement to fix this? Like I said, it seems that he's dictating everyone else's fate.
Absent the landowner giving you the easement, you could condemn the property through eminent domain to get a temporary easement. Through the court system, yeah, you would have to pay him for it, or him or her, I should say. And that could result in litigation.
What's the cost to clean out the pipes? He said it was done, how many years ago?
It was 2 years when Newport came in and helped us. The last quote I got from Utility Optics was close to $30,000 to come in and clean all those out and scope it.
So I'm going to reframe it for Joe because he didn't have a mic. So it was approximately 2 years ago that Newport cleaned the entirety of our system. We pulled out over 6 dump truck loads of sediment, I think, at that particular point, and it's flowing tremendous. And so I can't speak to prior to my arrival when it was actually jet vacked out. And so we have that on the schedule to be done again. And so our goal was to try to make sure we looked at it on an annual basis prior to the start of hurricane season. And so that is a critically important step. And then with Newport, the cost is roughly $10,000 to $12,000. But we're at a position where the demand on their truck is the next question. They've been great to help us. Try to do it in the off-peak period.
I have 2 more quick things from our board.
Real quick, yes, sir. Sorry, I'm not trying to be short, guys.
No.
I appreciate it.
All right, so one of them is the water constantly right now flows in that little waterfall by the walkway into our neighborhood, into the pond from the woods. And every time we have a rain event, that pond in the woods, it completely floods, puts the neighbor's yard underwater, utilities underwater, and we become one big pond. The walkway goes underwater. It doesn't seem that the pipes are working. It's where they have that little mesh thing for the stuff. Is there any possibility maybe to restrict some of that water, like a retaining wall or we don't know, something to, because that pond seems to, that floods that whole corner of our neighborhood every time, and the pipes don't seem like they're touching that pond. That's number one. And then number 2, when they did the woods, we can't ever find an agreement of where Cape Emerald allowed that woods water to be constantly dumping in right there. So that's our other 2 questions we can't seem to find answers. So That's it.
Sure. So again, what I would say is, if we're directed to by the town, we could always, again, the main decision was the Corps of Engineers told us. They did not want to see anything within those wetlands, but we can definitely revisit that in the direction of the town. And as far as, again, we had conversations way back then, but they probably weren't documented, but we, had discussions with previous boards and with them about this during flood events, the water coming from Ocean Oaks. And at that point, the decision was made that it was better off overall for everybody not to have that separation. But if the town and things have changed and they want to reopen that, but I will say that, it will be wetland impacts and coastal wetlands will be brought into the equation. And, unless there's new rules, as Commissioner Brownlow was talking about. But, again, at the direction of the town, if they want to investigate that, I'm sure it could be looked at.
And then, Mayor, I'll say my ending statement on this is, again, actively ready to go to assist and help. Just let us know what you need. And then secondarily, having looked at the totality of the system for this newly elected board, we had brought forward the concept of doing a town-wide stormwater evaluation study, but it wasn't funded. And in that study, I think you'll find that there's alternate options elsewhere, specifically on the Coast Guard Road now with the new technology, to leverage dune infiltration to a greater degree. So as soon as the Land's End project is up and running, we can point back to it as a positive example of how to utilize dune infiltration elsewhere. And that will even account for Island Circle, and the amount of water we're pumping up with our largest horsepower pump could theoretically turn and go the other direction 800 feet and terminate into the dune system and be filtered and protected. So there's the environmental, the best management practice, the total cost allocation, and I think there are solutions that will help and protect our friends in Cape Emerald more today based on the technology we have.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, any final comments from you, sir?
No, sir, thank you.
Thank you. Final comments from the board. Commissioner Sanderson?
No, thank you.
Commissioner Sawyer?
No comment.
Mr. Brownlow?
Now, I've met with Chip before, and we took a little tour of the community, and just now hearing this in total, and I've heard Matt discuss this in depth also. I would like to look at some other options and even go further into the community, just some ideas. Just everything we can throw at it, I think is going to be beneficial.
Thanks, sir. Commissioner Wogan?
No.
Commissioner Taylor?
No, I'm good at this time, thank you.
Again, I thank you all for coming. Hopefully it helped a little bit, if some at all. I really appreciate you all being here. Thank you. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.